George R.R. Martin asked Stephen King, how do you write so fast? It's a good question from a man who's able to write one word every 7 months.
George, we're going to have to wrap this up pretty soon. Is there anything that you've always wanted to ask me? Because, George, I will.
Yes.
That's
yes,
a
there is
wild
something
laugh.
I want to ask you. All right. How the fuck do you write so many books so fast?
That is a wild laugh,
I think-
dude.
I've had a really good 6 months. I've written 3 chapters, and you've
Yeah,
finished
but-
3 books in that time.
This man really wrote 1 chapter per 2 months? I mean, I guess you look at the quality of George R.R. Martin's world building and you look at Stephen King's. Stephen King doesn't so much as write a world as he does write a story within a world. Whereas George R.R. Martin is writing an entire world. I think that's pretty good, actually. It's pretty good.
Here's the thing, okay? There are books and there are books.
He's saying what I'm saying.
The way that I work, I try to get out there and I try to get 6 pages a day. So with a book like End of Watch, and when I'm working, I work every day, 3-4 hours, and I try to get those 6 pages and I try to get them fairly clean. So if the manuscript is, let's say, 360 pages long, that's basically 2 months' work. It's concentrated, but it's but that's assuming that it goes well.
And you do hit 6 pages a day?
I usually do.
You don't ever have a day where you sit down there and it's like constipation and you write a sentence and you hate the sentence and
Okay.
you check your email and you want...
I kind of love how George R.R. Martin is talking about writing. Like, hearing that he's got so much... He clearly beats himself up a lot over his writing, and I respect that.
Wonder if you had any talent after all, and maybe you should have been a plumber. Don't you have days like that?
No, I mean, there's real life. You know, I can be working away and something comes up, and you have to basically get up and you have to go to see the doctor, or you have to take somebody care package, or you have to go to the post office, because whatever. But mostly I try to get the 6 pages in, although entropy tries to intervene. You know, I did an event at Radio City Music Hall for charity with John Irving and Joe Rowling, and this was the time, J.K. Rowling. And
John Rowling. Dude, I'm just thinking about what George R.R. Martin is saying. Isn't it wild that he can be as revered of a writer as he is? I think that's the right word. And he still, like, doubts his own stuff. Like, I would say that next to Lord of the Rings, Tolkien, next to Tolkien is George R.R. Martin. I don't know of anyone else that's been able to build a world even somewhat equivalent to that, other than my favorite author, Garth Nix, who builds worlds and writes books faster than anyone on the planet.
this was at the time that she was finishing the 7th Harry Potter books. And I know...
I guess there is Harry Potter, but I would not equate Harry Potter to Lord of the Rings or to any of George R.R. Martin's books, House of the Dragon or Game of Thrones, because not because it's made for kids, but because the world is nowhere near as good as those. Like, it's just not as good a world. It's got stuff to it, but it's just not as good a world.
That I've been very fortunate.
Tell you what it is. Everything in J.K. Rowling's books feels like it was made up on the spot to fill in where the characters are going. You see what I'm saying? Like, how do I put it? Like, remember when they went to, I can't remember what movie it was or what book it was. They went to the bank at one point in Harry Potter and they had to sneak into the bank to steal something. I don't fully remember it, but it felt like that bank had just been made up in that moment. It hadn't always existed in the world. Whereas everything in Lord of the Rings and everything in Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon, it feels like that was already there, and now the characters are interacting with it, and that's what the difference is between those two books / worlds.
As a writer,
To me.
and you've been terrifically fortunate as a writer. You worked for a long time, wrote a lot of good books, won a lot of awards, and then out of nowhere, all of a sudden, this crazy thing happens where all these books are suddenly New York Times bestsellers, and God knows it's deserved, but it's a sort of sudden thing. And here's the other thing, okay? People yell at you and say, we want the next book, we want the next book. They're like babies, we want the next book right away. I mean, it's a great thing to want that, but the pressure that you feel or I feel compared to that final Harry Potter book, you know, everybody wanted that, and she came to New York and she was nearly finished with it, and she'd agreed to do this event. And Jo was trying to do 3 things at once. She was going to do a vacation with her kids. She was going to finish the last 5 or 6 chapters of the 7th Harry Potter book, and she was going to do this event. And she showed up to do the sound check at Radio City Music Hall, and she was dressed like any housewife or mother or anyone who was on vacation. She had a shell top on and white clam digger pants and loafers.
I don't think I've watched a video in the last year that has had me, like, this guy even speaks in a level of quality that is unreal. It's just, the story he's telling right now has got me so hooked in. I'm just...
or sandals or something, and her hair tied back in horsetails. And we were trying to talk about what we were going to do and everything. And the Scholastic Press publicist is pulling her aside and talking to her. And Jo was very polite. But when she came back and talked to me, she was really, really angry. And what she said was, they don't understand what we do they? And I said, how can they understand when we don't understand?
All too true.
That was cool, man. That's really interesting. It's kind of wild, the difference in speed and, you know, the difference in I wouldn't say there's a difference in quality between George R.R. Martin and Stephen King, because they're both top of their field, but to hear that George R.R. Martin is writing, you know, a chapter every 2 months while Stephen King is completing a book in 2 months, that's so crazy, dude. Super interesting though. Dude, go watch House of the Dragon. It's better than Game of Thrones. I love it. Yeah.